I'm going to talk about stress with you. I chose this topic because I think that most of us have experienced stress at some point, and I think it's very important for us to actually understand what stress is and why we react like we do when experiencing it. So, because we live in such a stressed and busy society, so I think it's actually very important for all of us. And when we people understand something uh, that happens within us or that something that we're experiencing, uh, we are more likely to not panic about it if we actually understand it and know why we feel like we do. So, what is stress actually? It's a physical response that happens when our body thinks that it's under attack. Uh, our body releases a complex mix of hormones and chemicals to prepare the body for physical action since it believes that it's under attack. And if we experience stress during a long period, it can affect our health very badly, both our physical and mental health. And this is actually what helped us survive the predators a long time ago when we had to either fight them or run away from them. And for example, poverty and political instability and such things uh, affect how we experience stress and how stressed we are. And how does it affect us? It targets the weakest part of us. And in a cognitive way, we might experience, for example, memory problems or self-doubt. In an emotional way, we might experience depression or irritability. In a behavioral way, we might feel demotivated or we might sleep too much or too little. And in a physical way, chest pain might occur. And then moving on to the biological factors. A man or a psychologist named Hans Selye studied physical reactions of humans and animals and how we react to injury and disease. And these changes helps us to deal with the illness and injury process. He named this process general adaptation syndrome. That will say the common pattern that how our body responds to illness. And this is characterized by the alarm, adaptation, and exhaustion stage. So, Hans Selye believed that the first thing that happens is the alarm reaction, which is a stage for physical preparations to fight the illness. Our heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing quicken to supply our muscles and our brain with oxygen. And all of these things happen within a few seconds, and this makes us react quickly to threats. When facing an extended threat, we switch from alarm mode to the next stage, adaptation. This is when the body is trying to adjust to the ongoing threat. Our body now works in a more moderate phase. If the threat still is hanging around, the body will enter the third phase, which is exhaustion. This is usually not permanent. With a lot of rest, our body will recover. But if the stressor is too strong, extreme exhaustion can result in death. Frequent or intense stress can result in permanent injuries which are stress-related, such as high blood pressure, kidney disease, or allergic reactions. And our body reacts like this because it wants to keep the homeostasis constant. And then moving on to the socio-cultural factors. Social support functions as an important stress buffer, so if one doesn't have much social support, they are more likely to get stressed. Social support affects our balance of hormones. People who get enough amounts of social support have an increased level of a hormone called oxytocin, which decreases anxiety levels and stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Stressed people who have enough of social support receives an oxytocin boost, which helps them feel less anxious and more drawn to other people, which keeps the social cycle going. But those who don't get enough of oxytocin because they don't hang out that much with people, they don't get enough support, will have more hormones with negative effects. So they will end up being more isolated and stressed than they were before. An experiment was done by a school or a class which discussed the effectiveness of social support in managing academic stress. Even though this took place in a school, it's pretty much the same for everybody experiencing stress, even in workplaces and such. So how? They gathered 120 students and divided them into two groups, one experimental group and one control group. The experimental group did have classes on social support which the control group did not. What were the results? They noticed a huge difference between the two groups. The experimental group proved to do much better handling the stress than the other group. So they were also much more satisfied with their academic performances. So having social life when experiencing stress makes everything much, much easier. And then some culture and stress, how that's related. The way individuals are likely to experience stress is in large amount affected by the culture they live in. And such things like life events can be seen as stressful. And for example, where you live, if you live in a big city or on the countryside, may cause big differences and in what you actually feel or experience as stressful. And some stressors might be universal, but there are a lot of stressors that are directly connected to cultures. For example, some cultures emphasize individual achievement, but in others being special is considered a threat. So that makes it two very different opinions on what is stressful. And there is very few systematic studies of how social differences are related to stress, but one was done in South Africa, and they found out that it correlated very little with standard measures of psychological distress. Instead, problems like breaking taboos were considered stressful. So this shows that a stress measure in one culture may not be very useful in others if the cultures are very different. And then moving on to how emotions affect our body. We experience our emotions in our body. And for example, our nervous system helps us to meet different challenges and to prepare our body on how to handle it. An experiment was done in this area by Jari Nummenmaa, Enrico Glerian, Rita Hari, and Jari K. Hietanen, and they published this study in 2013. So how did they do it? They did 5 experiments with 36 to 302 participants within each of the experiments. And the participants told how they experienced the feeling of their body associated with 6 basic and 7 complex emotions and a natural stage. The 6 basic ones was anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise, and the natural stage. And then the complex emotions was anxiety, love, depression, contempt, pride, shame, and envy. And all of these were then described by corresponding emotions. And when analyzing like clusters, the positive emotions formed one cluster and the negative ones formed actually 4 different ones. And the results were that emotional feelings are associated with bodily sensations, which could be at the core of the emotional experience. This may help us to understand mood disorders better, knowing how bodily sensations are associated with our emotions. And here is the picture of the emotions and how our body experiences it. So for example, when looking at anger, happiness, pride, and love, we see that it's mostly our upper body that is affected, and sadness, depression, and shame, they have a common thing as well, that our sensation decreases, and that's in our legs. So it's quite interesting to see how we experience different emotions in quite a similar way within our body. And then I'm going to move on to my last topic of this presentation, which emotions we experience during stress. If we focus on, for example, personality changes that can take place due to stress, we find changes like frustration, anger, problems in communication, and social isolation and irritability. And when experiencing chronic stress, we might have problems with confusion, difficulty concentrating, and problems with decision making. And this is due to stress hormones, which are decreasing the function of one part of our brain that is taking care of learning or remembering long-term memories, and for the part which is responsible for paying attention and solving problems. So yeah, this was my presentation about stress. I hope that you learned something new. At least I did during my research. So yeah, thank you.